How can you become the Queen of Nashville?
Might as well. I'm
First,
already here.
you must become the king's prisoner. Was Porter Wagoner's stage a pedestal? Or was it a gilded cage? And Dolly Parton, was she a prodigy? Or just the most precious songbird locked in that cage? Was their collaboration a musical miracle? Or was it a 7-year contract, a sentence disguised as a duet? So, what's crueler? $1 million lawsuit to keep that bird in its cage, or a song, I Will Always Love You? That isn't a love note, but the sweetest, cruelest dismissal notice ever written? To understand the man who would become the flamboyant, controlling gatekeeper of the Grand Ole Opry, you must first travel back to the hard, unforgiving landscape of the Missouri Ozarks during the Great Depression. Porter Wayne Wagoner was born on August 12th, 1927, in West Plains, Missouri. This was not the romantic, gentle country of songbooks. This was a world defined by scarcity, a rugged, stony land where Scots-Irish tradition met the brutal reality of the 1930s. His father, Charles Wagoner, was a sharecropper, a man trapped in a cycle of debt and dependency, struggling to coax corn from rented fields. His mother, Bessie, was a devout Baptist who found solace in the gospel hymns she sang at church. The Depression wasn't just a temporary problem for the Wagoner family. It became a permanent part of their lives. In 1933, when Porter was 6, they lost the farm. The humiliation of this failure was a defining blow, forcing Charles, a proud man, to take whatever work he could find. Often, that meant relying on the government relief programs of the WPA, Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration, just to put food on the table, earning a meager $20 a week. For a young Porter, this experience of profound poverty wasn't just a memory. It was what shaped his entire character. He witnessed his father's quiet struggle, the humiliation of depending on others for survival. It instilled in him a relentless, almost obsessive drive for self-sufficiency, and above all, financial security. He learned in a way that only the truly poor can, that the world was a precarious, dangerous place. Survival depended on grit, determination, and an unwavering, almost paranoid work ethic. This became the powerful underlying motivation for his ambition for the rest of his life. He wasn't just chasing fame, he was running from the ghost of that lost farm. This trauma was compounded by the sting of social prejudice. In the small hierarchical world of his school, Porter was an outsider. He was bullied relentlessly for his thick hillbilly accent, a common experience for rural children of the era. He was made to feel backward, unsophisticated, and less than. This deep-seated insecurity, this fear of being seen as a hick, would become a crucial piece of his psychological puzzle. He learned to build a wall around himself, a wall that would one day be covered in rhinestones. In this world of hardship, music was the only escape. The family's battery-powered radio, tuned to KWTO out of Springfield, was his connection to the outside world. Through the static, it brought the sounds of Jimmie Rodgers and later the haunting, tortured voice of Hank Williams into their small home. Porter soaked it all in. He learned to sing from his mother, and at the age of 8, he taught himself the guitar. By his early teens, he was already performing, forming bands like the Wagoner Boys with his brothers, playing at local fairs. The music wasn't just a passion, it was a potential ticket out. The harsh realities of poverty forced him to drop out of school at 15. He went to work, first in the grueling, dust-filled labor of a local quarry, then following his father into the terrifying darkness of the coal mines. His days were spent in suffocating, back-breaking labor. But the music never stopped. At night, he would wash the coal dust from his hands and play his guitar in local honky-tonks, his talent undeniable. In 1945, at the age of 18, he finally got his break. He he landed a regular performing spot on the same radio station he had grown up listening to, KWTO. A local butcher, impressed by his talent, agreed to sponsor his 15-minute morning show. Porter Wagoner, the boy who had shoveled coal, was now a paid radio performer. It was the first step on a long ladder, a climb fueled by the burning, desperate ambition to never ever be poor again. Porter's rise through the ranks of the country music world in the 1950s was steady and determined. He moved from radio in Springfield to a regional television show, developing a unique and captivating stage presence. He was folksy, affable, and utterly professional. In 1951, he was signed to RCA Victor. After a few years, he scored his first massive hit. The song, released in 1955, was A Satisfied Mind. The irony was profound. It was a mournful, philosophical ballad about the emptiness of wealth, with the haunting refrain, "The wealthiest person is a pauper at times, compared to the man with a satisfied mind." This song, a meditation on the uselessness of the very thing he craved, became his first number one, staying on the charts for 33 weeks. In 1957, he achieved the ultimate dream. He became a member of the Grand Ole Opry. This wasn't just another job, it was the highest honor in country music. But he wasn't content to be just another member. He understood television. It was during this time that he cultivated his signature, iconic look. Inspired by the flamboyant Western wear of stars like Webb Pierce, Porter embraced the rhinestone cowboy aesthetic with a vengeance. He commissioned elaborate, custom-made suits from the legendary Hollywood tailor Nudie Cohn. These weren't just suits, they were works of art, glittering with sequins, crystals, and intricate thematic embroidery, covered wagons, cacti, and his own name emblazoned in jewels. This was not just showmanship, it was a calculated psychological act. The boy who was bullied for his hillbilly accent was now the most dazzling man in any room. The man who grew up in poverty was now literally wearing his wealth. The rhinestones were his armor, a visual representation of his journey from the dusty poverty of the Ozarks to the glittering stage of the Opry. He had created a persona that could not be mocked, a king in a glittering court. In 1960, he took his biggest gamble yet. He launched his own syndicated television program, The Porter Wagoner Show. It was a bold, revolutionary move. The show was an immediate runaway success, shot in vibrant color, bringing the relatively niche world of the Opry into the living rooms of millions. He had built his own platform, his own kingdom. He was the undisputed star, the producer, the man in charge. His drive for security had paid off. He wasn't just a singer who could be dropped by a label. He was an institution. His show had a regular cast, the comedian Spec Rhodes and his popular girl singer Norma Jean. But in 1967, she decided to leave. Her departure left a gaping hole in his carefully constructed world. Porter, the consummate showman and a demanding boss, needed a replacement. He needed someone with sparkle, but someone who would ultimately still be his girl singer, an accessory to his own stardom. He had no idea he was about to meet someone who intended to wear a crown of her own. The Rhinestone King had built an empire to protect himself from the memory of poverty, secure within his television show. But even the most heavily guarded empires are vulnerable to forces of nature. Hundreds of miles away, in the heart of the Smoky Mountains, such a force was gathering strength. A young woman forged not in fear, but in imagination, her ambition as boundless as the peaks surrounding her. Her journey to Nashville would inevitably lead her to Porter Wagoner's carefully controlled world. While Porter Wagoner was meticulously constructing his rhinestone armor against the ghosts of his Ozark past, hundreds of miles away, in a world both geographically and spiritually distinct, another force of nature was taking shape. To understand the woman who would eventually break free from Porter's control, one must look at her origins in Appalachia, into the misty, isolated hollows of the Great Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee. This was a land of staggering beauty and staggering poverty, a place where music was essential to the culture, carrying their history, faith, and the strong spirit built from hardship. Dolly Rebecca Parton entered this world on January 19, 1946, not in a town, but in a specific named hollow, Locust Ridge, near the small community of Pittman Center, close to Sevierville, Tennessee. She was the fourth of 12 children, born to Robert Lee Parton and Avie Lee Owens Parton, a sprawling mountain family clinging to existence in a tiny one-room log cabin perched on the banks of the Little Pigeon River. To say the Partons were poor is an understatement. It's a word that barely scratches the surface of their reality. Dolly's childhood was lived in a world almost unimaginable to modern sensibilities. The cabin, built by her father, housed 14 people. There was no electricity flickering through wires, no running water pouring from taps. Heat came from a fireplace, light from kerosene lamps. Winters were brutal, the mountain winds whistling through the chinks in the logs. Food, while often grown or hunted, was never guaranteed, and Dolly has spoken openly about how often her family went hungry. Life was a constant, relentless cycle of chores, of making do, of stretching every resource to its absolute limit. Robert Lee Parton, Dolly's father, was a man of the mountains, hard-working, resourceful, but trapped by the limited opportunities of his environment. He farmed a small, steep plot of rented tobacco land, a notoriously difficult and unpredictable crop. When farming wasn't enough, he took whatever work he could find, seasonal construction jobs, laboring in nearby towns, anything to keep his large family fed. Though illiterate, he possessed a quiet intelligence and a fierce pride. He instilled in his children the value of hard work and the importance of family loyalty. Avie Lee Owens Parton, Dolly's mother, was the family's spiritual and emotional center. Descended from a line of Owens family preachers, her Pentecostal faith was the bedrock of her existence, providing strength and hope amidst the daily struggles. But she was also the one who nurtured the family's love for music and storytelling. It was Avie Lee who filled the tiny cabin with stories, mountain legends, Bible parables, tales spun from her own imagination. And it was Avie Lee who filled it with music. Her voice, clear and strong, sang the ancient songs of Appalachia, the haunting, high, lonesome sound of ballads carried over centuries from England, Scotland, and Ireland, preserved and transformed in the isolation of the mountains. She sang mournful murder ballads, lively fiddle tunes passed down through generations, and the fervent, soul-stirring hymns of their faith. Music wasn't a performance, it was communication, prayer, history, and healing, all woven together. This was the world that forged Dolly Parton, and critically, it forged her differently than Porter Wagoner's Ozarks forged him. Porter's ambition, as we've seen, was born from a fear of poverty, a deep psychological wound manifested as a relentless drive for security and control. Dolly's ambition, while equally fierce, seemed to spring from a different source: imagination. She experienced profound poverty, but she refused to be defined solely by its limitations. She saw the hardship, but she also saw the beauty. In the mountains, in her family's love, in the power of a well-told story or a perfectly sung melody, her identity, her entire worldview, was perhaps best encapsulated by the true story she would later immortalize in her iconic song, Coat of Many Colors. As the song recounts, her mother lovingly stitched together a winter coat for her from a box of colorful fabric scraps. When Dolly wore the coat to school, the other children, perhaps wealthier town children, cruelly mocked her coat of rags. But Dolly, armed with the story her mother had told her, comparing it to Joseph's coat in the Bible, didn't shrink in shame. She confronted the bullies, proudly declaring that her coat was made with love, and that made her richer than them. This wasn't just a childhood anecdote, it was a foundational moment. It demonstrated Dolly's innate ability to reframe hardship through the power of narrative and self-belief. It showed the source of her armor, not external glitter like Porter's rhinestones, but an internal, radical, unshakable confidence in her own worth, instilled by her mother's love. She learned early that true wealth wasn't material, it was spiritual, familial, and creative. She was, by all accounts, different from the start. She was full of energy and charisma, even in the crowded cabin. She possessed not just talent, but an almost unnerving certainty about her own destiny. She was singing almost before she could talk, her small voice already possessing that startling clarity, power, and unique vibrato that would become her trademark. She famously performed concerts for the chickens and pigs in the yard, using a tin can on a stick as her microphone, already envisioning a larger stage. Her mother recognized the extraordinary gift and nurtured it, teaching her the old songs, encouraging her to harmonize. But it was her maternal uncle, Bill Owens, himself a struggling musician, who became her first crucial champion outside the immediate family. He saw the depth of her talent, the intensity of her ambition, and dedicated himself to helping her achieve her dreams. Around the age of 7, Uncle Bill bought Dolly her first real guitar, a small Martin. He taught her chords, encouraged her songwriting, and became her steadfast partner in navigating the first tentative steps of her career. Her performing debut came around the age of 5 or 6, singing gospel songs at church picnics and gatherings. Her first paid gig followed soon after, earning her a small sum singing on WIVK radio in Knoxville. Like Porter, she faced the sting of being teased for her thick mountain accent when encountering children from town, an experience that likely only strengthened her resolve to succeed on her own terms, to embrace her roots rather than hide them. Her ambition burned with an intensity that belied her age. While still a young girl listening to the grand ole Opry crackling over the radio, she declared her intention. One day, she would sing on that stage. It wasn't a wish, it was a statement of fact. In 1956, at the age of 10, Dolly Parton took her first major step towards that dream. Accompanied by her supportive Uncle Bill, she auditioned for Cass Walker's Farm and Home Hour, a hugely popular live radio and television variety show broadcast daily from Knoxville. Cass Walker was a local legend, a grocery store magnate, a shrewd businessman, a flamboyant personality, and a powerful local politician. His show was a chaotic, unpredictable, but beloved mix of live country music performances, down-home comedy, local news, and enthusiastic advertisements for his chain of supermarkets. For aspiring musicians in East Tennessee, appearing on Cass Walker's show was the biggest break imaginable. Dolly, tiny but radiating confidence, auditioned and immediately won over the pragmatic Cass Walker. He recognized not just her incredible voice, but her natural charisma, her ability to connect with the audience. She became a regular on the show, performing several times a week, often traveling the 60 miles round trip from Sevierville after school. Cass Walker's show became her finishing school, her version of Porter's early radio days at KWTO. She learned microphone technique, stage presence, how to handle an audience, how to banter, how to sell a song. Cass Walker, known for his sometimes eccentric ways but also for his eye for talent, became an early, crucial mentor, giving her invaluable exposure and professional experience. She was learning the craft of show business from the ground up, absorbing lessons that would serve her well for the rest of her life. Her reputation as a child prodigy grew throughout East Tennessee. Then, in 1959, came the moment she had dreamed of since she first heard the Opry on the radio. Her Uncle Bill arranged for her to travel to Nashville and make her debut on the Grand Ole Opry stage at the Ryman Auditorium. Introduced by none other than Johnny Cash, the 13-year-old Dolly Parton, clad in a dress her mother had made, walked out onto the hallowed stage where her heroes had stood. She sang George Jones's "You Gotta Be My Baby." The audience erupted. She received 3 encores. It was a stunning debut, a clear sign of the superstar she was destined to become. That same year, seeking to capitalize on her growing local fame, she traveled with her uncle to Lake Charles, Louisiana, and recorded her first single for the small independent Gold Band Records label. The song was Puppy Love, a charmingly naive rockabilly-tinged pop tune, miles away from the country music that was her true passion. It was an attempt, likely orchestrated by others, to fit her into the burgeoning teen pop market. The single went nowhere commercially, but it marked her official entry into the recording industry. Despite the Opry triumph and the recording experience, the path forward was still unclear. She was a child star in a regional market, but Nashville, the true center of power, remained tantalizingly out of reach. She continued performing on Cass Walker's show, attending high school, and writing songs with a feverish intensity. Her notebooks filled with lyrics and melodies, stories drawn from her life, her family, the mountains she loved, her desire to get to Nashville, to fully commit herself to her dream, became an all-consuming passion. Education became secondary. Like Porter, she saw music not just as a passion, but as her only viable escape route from the poverty that had defined her childhood. The day after she graduated from Sevier County High School in June 1964, Dolly Parton made good on her promise. With $20 borrowed from her uncle, a single cardboard suitcase filled with her clothes, and her precious notebooks of songs, she boarded a Greyhound bus bound for Nashville, Tennessee. She was 18 years old, leaving behind everything she had ever known: her family, her mountains, the security of her local fame, to chase an improbable dream in a city notorious for breaking hearts. Her Uncle Bill Owens, her steadfast champion, moved to Nashville with her, providing crucial support and partnership in the challenging years ahead. Nashville, in the mid-1960s, was a town undergoing a transformation. The polished, pop-influenced Nashville sound, pioneered by producers like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley, was at its peak, smoothing out the rough edges of country music for a broader audience. But alongside the established stars, a new generation of songwriters and artists was emerging, pushing boundaries and bringing a new level of lyrical depth and personal honesty to the genre. It was a city buzzing with opportunity, but also saturated with talent. Thousands of hopeful singers and songwriters arrived each year, all vying for the same limited number of breaks. Dolly's arrival was far from auspicious. She was just another hopeful face in the crowd, a small-town girl with big dreams and an even bigger hairstyle. The initial years were a period of intense struggle, loneliness, and frequent disillusionment. She and her Uncle Bill lived in cheap apartments, sometimes barely scraping by. Dolly worked a series of odd jobs to survive: waitressing, working at a photo developing lab, anything to pay the rent, while she relentlessly pursued her musical goals. She famously recalled dumpster diving for leftover food from hotel room service trays delivered to nearby motels. It was a harsh introduction to the realities of Music City, a far cry from the Opry stage. But Dolly possessed two crucial assets: her unwavering self-belief and her prodigious talent as a songwriter. While she dreamed of being a singer, she understood early on that songwriting could be her key to unlocking the doors of the industry. She and Uncle Bill spent countless hours pounding the pavement on Music Row, knocking on the doors of publishing companies, pitching their songs to anyone who would listen. Dolly's writing style was unique, deceptively simple melodies paired with lyrics of startling emotional depth, often drawn directly from her own life experiences. They were stories rooted in Appalachian reality, but speaking to universal human emotions. Slowly, painstakingly, her talent began to get noticed. In 1965, she and Uncle Bill signed a songwriting contract with Combine Music, a publishing house run by the influential Fred Foster. Foster, who also owned the successful independent label Monument Records, was known for his eclectic tastes and his willingness to take risks on unconventional artists. He had signed Roy Orbison and Chris Christopherson, among others. Foster recognized the raw, unique talent in Dolly's writing. Her first major success as a songwriter came in 1966. Country star Bill Phillips recorded a song Dolly had co-written with Uncle Bill, a heartbreaking ballad called Put It Off Until Tomorrow. During the recording session, Phillips needed a high harmony vocal. Dolly, who was present at the session, stepped up to the microphone. Her contract with Combine Monument initially prevented her from singing on her own records, but she was allowed to sing backup. Her uncredited harmony vocal, pure, soaring, and filled with aching emotion, transformed the record. Put It Off Until Tomorrow became a massive country hit, reaching number 6 on the Billboard charts. Suddenly, Nashville was buzzing. Industry insiders, DJs, and fans alike were asking the same question: who is that girl singing harmony? The secret couldn't be kept for long. The power and uniqueness of Dolly's voice were undeniable. Fred Foster finally realized what a major talent he had signed. He had been trying to mold Dolly into something she wasn't, a pop singer, perhaps, ignoring the powerful, authentic country voice that was so natural to her. The success of the Bill Phillips record forced a change in strategy. Foster agreed to let Dolly record as a country artist. Her first official country single for Monument Records, released in early 1967, was a song she had written called Dumb Blonde. It was a sassy, defiant tune, cleverly playing with stereotypes while asserting her intelligence and agency. It broke into the top 30, her first chart success as a solo artist. It was followed quickly by Something Fishy, another self-penned song with a similar feisty attitude which climbed even higher, reaching the top 20. Dolly Parton, after 3 long years of struggle, was finally making her mark. Her unique voice, her compelling songwriting, and her vibrant personality were beginning to cut through the Nashville noise. It was at this exact moment, the spring and summer of 1967, that Dolly Parton's rising trajectory intersected with Porter Wagoner's urgent need. Norma Jean, Porter Wagoner's longtime girl singer, had decided to leave the Porter Wagoner Show to get married and return to her native Oklahoma, seeking a quieter life off the road. Porter, the meticulous showman, knew how crucial the girl singer role was to the show's chemistry and appeal. He needed someone extraordinary. Fred Foster, Dolly's publisher and label boss, saw the perfect opportunity. He knew Porter was searching. He knew Dolly was ready for a bigger stage. He understood that placing Dolly on Porter's massively popular show, beamed into millions of homes each week, would be the rocket fuel her career needed. He packaged up Dolly's latest recordings, likely including Dumb Blonde and Something Fishy, and sent them directly to Porter Wagoner. Porter listened. He heard the voice, undeniably country, undeniably powerful, undeniably unique. He heard the spark, the personality, but he also likely heard the difference. This wasn't the smooth, conventional sound of Norma Jean. This was something wilder, brighter, potentially harder to control. Dolly's image, too, was already developing its signature flamboyance. The big hair, the bright makeup, the tight clothes, a stark contrast to Norma Jean's more demure presentation. Porter, a traditionalist at heart despite his own flashy suits, was reportedly hesitant. Was she too different? Would his loyal conservative audience accept her? Could he manage such a vibrant, independent personality? But the sheer force of her talent, the undeniable star quality, ultimately outweighed his reservations. He made the call. He summoned Dolly Parton to his office for an audition. Imagine the scene, the towering figure of Porter Wagoner, the established king nearly 20 years her senior, lord of his television domain. And facing him, the petite, 21-year-old Dolly Parton, fresh from the mountains, radiating a potent mixture of nervous excitement and unshakable self-belief. She sang for him, pouring her heart and soul into the songs that told her story. Porter was won over, but his initial offer, according to Dolly, reflected his ingrained need for control. He didn't immediately offer her the coveted co-starring role. Instead, he proposed she join his roadshow troupe first, perhaps as a way to test the waters, to ease her in, to maintain the existing hierarchy. Dolly, pragmatic and patient, accepted. But destiny, and perhaps Dolly's sheer magnetism, intervened. Before the roadshow plan could fully materialize, Porter made the decisive leap. He officially offered Dolly Parton the role of the new girl singer on the Porter Wagoner show. The stage was set. The ambitious prodigy from Appalachia had arrived at the court of the established rhinestone king. The mutual need was palpable, the potential undeniable. But the path from audition to national phenomenon would not be paved with immediate acceptance. It would begin with a difficult test, a hostile reception that would challenge the newcomer's resilience, before ultimately forging the legendary duet that would captivate a nation and change both their lives forever. September 9th, 1967. This was the moment Dolly Parton had dreamed of, fought for, since she was a child singing for chickens in a Smoky Mountain holler. National television. The biggest stage in country music beamed into millions of homes. But the dream quickly collided with a harsh reality. The audience of the Porter Wagoner show was fiercely loyal, deeply conservative, and devoted to the woman Dolly was replacing, the wholesome, unassuming Norma Jean. Dolly Parton was everything Norma Jean wasn't. Where Norma Jean was demure, Dolly was dazzling. Where Norma Jean's voice was smooth and traditional, Dolly's was high, piercing, trembling with Appalachian soul and hinting at pop sensibilities. Her look, even then, was unapologetically flamboyant. The teased hair, the bright makeup, the clothes perhaps a little tighter, a little shorter than the Opry standard. She was, to many in Porter's established audience, an unwelcome shock to the system. The reaction was immediate and brutal. They booed her during her solo performances. They sat on their hands, refusing to applaud. Letters flooded the television station, demanding Porter bring back Norma Jean. Audience members would shout Norma Jean's name from the studio seats. A constant, humiliating reminder that she was seen not as a new star, but as an unwanted usurper. Dolly later recalled, "Oh, it was awful. It really was. They just hated me. They loved Norma Jean, and they just resented me." I would cry my eyes out. I thought, well, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have come here. It was a difficult ordeal, a public hazing that could have easily broken a less resilient person. Here she was on the precipice of her dream, facing outright rejection. But Dolly Parton, shaped by her poverty and driven by an almost supernatural self-belief, refused to give up. She possessed a core of steel beneath a sparkling exterior. Week after grueling week, she walked out onto that stage, faced the hostile crowd, smiled her dazzling smile, and sang her heart out. She sang the songs Porter assigned her, but she also fought to include her own compositions, sharing stories from her mountain upbringing, weaving her unique personality into every performance. Crucially, she had a powerful, unwavering ally, Porter Wagoner himself. Whatever initial reservations Porter had, he recognized her star power. He believed in her talent and was fiercely protective of his show. He was not a man to easily admit a mistake or bow to audience pressure. He stood by her, firmly and publicly. He used his popularity as a shield, telling the audience, "Now, folks, I know you love Norma Jean. We all did. But this little lady here has got something special, and I want you to give her a chance. You listen to her sing. You listen to her heart. She's one of us." He used his immense popularity and folksy charm as a shield. He engaged Dolly in witty, spontaneous banter between songs, showcasing her quick wit and infectious laugh. He deliberately highlighted her down-home roots, emphasizing her authenticity, framing her not as a flashy outsider, but as a genuine daughter of the country tradition. He gave her space to tell her stories, to connect with the audience on a human level beyond the music. Slowly, painstakingly, the audience began to change their minds. The audience started to see past the big hair and the high voice. They saw the vulnerability, the humor, the genuine warmth. They heard the undeniable power of her singing, the emotional depth of her songwriting. And then Porter made the decision that would solidify their partnership and change the course of country music history. He decided they should sing together. It wasn't initially part of the plan. Porter had always had his girl singer perform solo spots, but he heard the potential, the unique blend their voices created almost accidentally during rehearsals or impromptu moments on the show. He commissioned songwriters to craft materials specifically for them, or they found existing songs that suited their dynamic. The result was instant magic. Their voices were seemingly disparate. His warm, sturdy, slightly nasal baritone, deeply rooted in traditional honky-tonk, her bright, soaring, almost ethereal soprano, carrying the high, lonesome sound of the mountains. Yet they blended with an intuitive, almost perfect harmony. It was a study in contrast that created a unified whole. Porter provided the anchor, the earthy foundation. Dolly provided the sparkle, the emotional fire. Together, they created a third, unique voice, a sound that felt both timelessly traditional and excitingly contemporary. The audience, which had resisted Dolly as a solo act, was utterly captivated by the duet. The chemistry was palpable, the sound undeniable. In late 1967, Porter took Dolly into the RCA studios, his studio under his production guidance, to record their first official duet single. The song chosen was a poignant folk ballad by Tom Paxton, "The Last Thing on My Mind." Released in December 1967, "The Last Thing on My Mind" was an immediate, runaway smash. It soared into the top 10 of the Billboard country charts, selling over 1 million copies and earning them their first gold record together. The partnership was no longer just a television arrangement. It was a recording phenomenon. The audience hadn't just accepted Dolly. They had embraced the duo. The boos were replaced by thunderous applause. The Rhinestone King had found his queen, and the golden age of Porter and Dolly had officially begun. The period from 1968 through roughly 1974 marked the imperial phase of the Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton partnership. They were an unstoppable force, a commercial and creative juggernaut that dominated country music. The hits came with breathtaking speed and consistency, a seemingly endless stream of perfectly crafted duets that defined the sound of the era. Following the success of The Last Thing on My Mind, their first duet album, Just Between You and Me, released in early 1968, also climbed into the top 10. Suddenly, they were releasing a constant stream of new music. They released a staggering 13 studio albums together in just 7 years, an almost unheard of pace, each one eagerly anticipated by their massive fan base. Their singles became fixtures in the upper echelons of the country charts. They scored 21 top 40 country hits together, including 14 top 10s. Songs like the heartbreaking cheating ballad Just Someone I Used to Know, the defiant holding on to nothing, the tender declaration Always, Always, the evocative autobiographical gospel tune Daddy Was an Old-Time Preacher Man, the optimistic working-class anthem We'll Get Ahead Someday, the hauntingly beautiful Tomorrow is Forever, and the sweetly romantic Lost Forever in Your Kiss. Their harmonies were the gold standard, seemingly effortless yet meticulously crafted, showcasing an almost supernatural vocal blend. They possessed an uncanny ability to convey complex emotions, from playful flirtation to devastating heartbreak, their voices weaving around each other with intuitive grace. They weren't just singing songs, they were inhabiting them, creating miniature dramas that resonated deeply with their audience. The industry recognized their dominance. They won the prestigious Country Music Association Award for Vocal Group of the Year in 1968. When the CMA created a specific category for Vocal Duo of the Year in 1970, Porter and Dolly won it decisively and repeated their victory in 1971. They were, quite simply, the benchmark against which all other country duos were measured. Their recording success fueled by the unprecedented popularity of the Porter Wagoner Show. With Dolly now firmly established as the beloved co-star, the show reached its peak popularity. Syndicated to over 100 stations nationwide and eventually reaching international markets, it became the most watched country music program in America, pulling in an estimated 10 million viewers each week. In many parts of the country, particularly in rural areas, Porter and Dolly weren't just stars, they were practically family. Their weekly appearance a cherished ritual. Their on-screen chemistry was the show's secret weapon. The playful, often flirtatious, sometimes fatherly banter between the tall, lanky, rhinestone-clad king and the tiny, bubbly, sparkling queen became the show's signature. It felt unscripted, genuine, a glimpse into a relationship that seemed both professional and deeply personal. They perfected a kind of down-home charm that was irresistible, bringing the warmth and tradition of the Grand Ole Opry into the modern age of color television. They created the template for countless country music variety shows that followed. And Porter Wagoner, the astute businessman whose ambition was forever linked to his fear of poverty, ensured he capitalized fully on this empire they were building together. When he brought Dolly over to RCA Victor in 1967, he didn't just facilitate the deal. He became her producer. For the next 7 years, Porter produced almost all of Dolly's solo albums and their duet albums for RCA. This gave him immense creative control over her recorded output. Furthermore, and most crucially for the future conflict, Porter formalized their business relationship beyond the television show. In 1967, he co-founded a music publishing company called Opry Publishing. The name was derived from the surnames of its principal partners, Owens, Parton, and Wagoner. Under the terms of the agreement, Opry would own the publishing rights, and thus a significant share of the future income for all the songs Dolly Parton wrote or co-wrote during this period. At the time, this likely seemed like a standard, even generous arrangement in the often exploitative world of the music business. Porter was investing in Dolly, providing the platform and production expertise. Owning a share of her publishing was seen as his return on that investment. Dolly, young and eager for success, likely signed the agreement without fully comprehending its long-term implications. Porter, ever focused on security, believed he was making a smart, protective business move, intertwining their financial futures and ensuring he would continue to benefit from the talent he was nurturing. In reality, he was creating the financial entanglement that would later make their separation so incredibly messy and bitter. The basis for the future multi-million-dollar lawsuit was created right here amidst their greatest success. The relationship between Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton during these golden years was, by all accounts, extraordinarily complex, deeply layered and fraught with unspoken tensions, even amidst their greatest triumphs. It defied easy categorization, existing in a murky, emotionally charged space that blurred the lines between professional, familial, and something more elusive. On the surface, it adhered to the classic Svengali protégée narrative. Porter was the older, established star, the mentor, who had discovered the raw, unpolished talent and molded her for success. He opened the doors, guided her through the complex and difficult Nashville music business, taught her about stagecraft, television technique, and the art of connecting with an audience. He was fiercely protective of her, shielding her from the industry's harsher realities, championing her talent when others might have dismissed her unconventional style. As Porter once said, "I saw something in her nobody else saw. I knew she had that star quality. I just had to bring it out, let the world see what I saw." Dolly, in turn, initially embraced the role of the eager, grateful student. She was young, relatively inexperienced in the national spotlight despite her years on local TV, and keenly aware of the magnitude of the opportunity Porter had given her. She respected his experience, his business acumen, his deep understanding of the country music audience. She soaked up his knowledge, learned the ropes, and expressed her gratitude frequently and sincerely. Porter provided a structure, a stability, and a powerful sense of belonging that she, as a young woman far from her mountain home, likely craved. Their bond quickly deepened beyond the professional. Porter, whose own family life was often complicated, seemed to adopt Dolly as a surrogate daughter or younger sister. He became fiercely possessive of her time and attention, reportedly discouraging potential romantic interests and keeping her close within his professional orbit. Dolly, who had left her large, close-knit family behind at 18, found in Porter a powerful, if demanding, father figure. She often referred to him as her Nashville daddy. They developed a deep, genuine affection, an easy intimacy born from spending countless hours together on the road, in the studio, and on the television set. Their playful banter on screen wasn't entirely an act. It reflected a real, albeit complex, connection. But interwoven with the affection and mentorship was the undeniable thread of control. Porter Wagoner was a man accustomed to being in charge. His television show was his show. His name was on the marquee. He had built his empire through sheer force of will and a meticulous attention to detail. His need for control, rooted perhaps in his childhood insecurities and fear of poverty, was absolute. He expected loyalty, deference, and ultimately obedience from those within his orbit. And Dolly, despite her gratitude, was not naturally subservient. As Dolly explained, Porter was very dominating. He had to be the boss. He tried to control everything I did musically and personally. And I understood in a way. He had this big show and I was part of it, and he needed it to run his way, but I had my own dreams. Complicating matters further was the undeniable, albeit often unspoken, artistic rivalry. While Porter championed Dolly's talent, he was also a traditionalist, deeply committed to the classic country sound. Dolly, however, was an innovator, a restless creative spirit constantly absorbing new influences, her songwriting instinctively blending her mountain roots with the melodies and structures of pop, folk, and even rock music. This fundamental artistic difference created friction. Porter, as her producer, often tried to steer her recordings towards a more traditional sound, sometimes clashing with her burgeoning pop sensibilities. Furthermore, as Dolly's solo star began to rise, eclipsing even Porter's own considerable fame, a new, more dangerous element entered the dynamic: professional jealousy. Porter, the man who had discovered her, now found himself increasingly in her shadow. While he likely felt genuine pride in her success, it must have also stung his ego. He was the king, but the queen was becoming more powerful, her influence extending far beyond the borders of his rhinestone kingdom. He reportedly grew resentful of the time and attention she devoted to her solo career, viewing it as a distraction from, or even a betrayal of, their partnership. This complex mix of conflicting roles created an environment where misunderstandings and conflict were likely to happen. The deep affection was real, but so was the simmering resentment. The gratitude was genuine, but so was the growing desire for independence. The perfect harmony they projected on screen was becoming an increasingly fragile facade, masking a complex, often painful power struggle being waged behind the scenes. The seeds of their eventual explosive breakup were being sown right here, amidst the gold records, the standing ovations, and the blinding glare of the television lights. Their successful partnership was glittering on the surface, but it was built on unstable ground that was beginning to show cracks. The golden age glittered, a seemingly perfect union dominating the airwaves and the charts. But the very success they built together contained the seeds of its own destruction. As the protégée blossomed into a singular artistic force, her ambition straining against the confines of the partnership, the mentor's need for control tightened like a vice. The gilded cage, once a symbol of opportunity, was becoming a prison. The harmony that enchanted millions began to mask a growing, irreconcilable discord, setting the stage for a heartbreaking, but perhaps inevitable, departure. The years 1971 to 1974 represented a period of profound paradox in the Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton story. On the surface, their joint empire reached its absolute zenith. Their duet hits continued to dominate the country charts, culminating in their final #1 together, "Please Don't Stop Loving Me," in the spring of 1974. The Porter Wagoner Show remained a television juggernaut, a seemingly unshakable institution. They were, to the outside world, the picture of perfect, harmonious success. But beneath the glittering facade, the foundation was crumbling. The subtle tensions and creative differences that had simmered for years were now erupting into open conflict. The partnership, which had once protected her, now felt like a prison. The core issue was simple, yet profoundly complex. Dolly Parton had outgrown Porter Wagoner. While Porter remained the undisputed king of his television domain, Dolly was rapidly ascending to a different stratosphere altogether. Her solo career, initially nurtured under Porter's production guidance at RCA, took on a life of its own, fueled by an almost unbelievable explosion of creativity. She wasn't just singing hits, she was writing them, crafting a body of work that was deeply personal, artistically ambitious, and commercially potent. The turning point had arguably been Coat of Many Colors in 1971. More than just a top 5 country hit, the song was a cultural moment. Its poignant autobiographical story of poverty, maternal love, and defiant pride resonated far beyond the traditional country audience. It established Dolly not just as a singer, but as a storyteller of profound depth, a poet laureate of the Appalachian experience. The album of the same name was hailed as a masterpiece, showcasing her burgeoning confidence and unique artistic vision. She followed it with a string of critically acclaimed albums that further solidified her artistic identity. My Tennessee Mountain Home, a nostalgic concept album celebrating her roots, and Bubbling Over, showcasing her infectious personality. Her songwriting was becoming sharper, more nuanced, exploring themes of love, loss, independence, and the complexities of women's lives with a clarity and honesty rarely heard on country radio. Then, in late 1973, came the 1-2 punch that irrevocably altered her trajectory. Jolene and I Will Always Love You. Written incredibly in the same period, perhaps even on the same day according to some accounts, these two songs represented the pinnacle of her songwriting genius and catapulted her into a new dimension of stardom. Jolene, with its driving minor key melody, its desperate, almost frantic plea, and its unforgettable central riff, was unlike anything else in country music. It was dark, obsessive, and utterly captivating. Released as a single in October 1973, it became her second solo #1 on the country charts. But its impact went far beyond Nashville. The song became a massive international hit, reaching the charts in the UK and beyond, covered by artists across genres from rock to pop to folk. It was undeniable proof of Dolly's crossover appeal, a song that transcended boundaries and announced the arrival of a major global talent. Almost simultaneously, I Will Always Love You, initially written as that personal farewell to Porter, was recorded for her upcoming album, Jolene. Released as the follow-up single in March 1974, it too shot straight to #1 on the country charts. While its global phenomenon status wouldn't arrive until Whitney Houston's version nearly 2 decades later, the song's simple, heartbreaking beauty was immediately apparent. It showcased Dolly's mastery of emotional nuance, her ability to convey profound love and painful finality in the same breath. Having two such monumental, career-defining songs released back-to-back was unprecedented. Dolly Parton was no longer just Porter Wagoner's talented protégée, or even just a successful country singer. She was becoming a major star, full of creative energy, captivating audiences worldwide, and rapidly overshadowing the man who had given her her start. This astronomical rise created an unbearable tension. The Porter Wagoner show, once a launching pad, now felt like a gilded cage. Porter, watching his protégé eclipse him, struggled intensely. His reaction, rooted in jealousy and a fear of being left behind, manifested in escalating conflicts. Their creative clashes over her pop-leaning sound became constant, and their once affectionate personal relationship strained into open hostility, with backstage arguments becoming legendary in Nashville. Dolly recounted, "We fought like cats and dogs. It just got to where it was awful. He wouldn't listen. He was just so stubborn, set in his ways, and I was just as stubborn, set in mine. I knew what I needed to do, and he couldn't see it or wouldn't see it." Porter, clinging to the formula that had brought them both such success, couldn't comprehend why Dolly would want to change anything. He likely saw her ambition not as a natural drive for artistic growth, but as ingratitude, even betrayal. He had given her the keys to the kingdom. Why would she want to leave? He tightened his grip, reportedly becoming more demanding, more critical, perhaps even trying to sabotage her solo efforts by refusing studio time or withholding support. Dolly, feeling trapped, stifled, and increasingly resentful of his control, knew the situation was untenable. The partnership that had been her salvation was now actively hindering her potential. Staying meant compromising her artistic vision, limiting her global reach, and remaining subservient to a man whose shadow she had clearly outgrown. The love and loyalty she felt towards Porter were immense, making the decision agonizing. But the drive to fulfill her own destiny, that unshakable self-belief forged in the Smoky Mountains, was even stronger. She had to leave. But breaking free from Porter Wagoner, her boss, her producer, her publisher, her mentor, her Nashville daddy, would be the most difficult and painful act of her young life. The decision to leave the Porter Wagoner show wasn't made overnight. It was a slow, agonizing process that unfolded over months, perhaps even years, filled with sleepless nights, tearful confrontations, and soul-searching. Dolly was acutely aware of the debt she owed Porter. He hadn't just given her a job. He had believed in her when few others did, fought for her at RCA, co-signed loans for her, and provided a platform that had made her a household name. Walking away felt like tearing up the very foundation of her success. She was also bound by contracts for the television show, recording contracts with RCA, and the crucial publishing contract with Opry that gave Porter half ownership of her burgeoning song catalog. Untangling these complex business ties would be a monumental task, fraught with potential legal battles. But the artistic imperative, the need to take control of her own creative destiny, ultimately outweighed the loyalty and the fear. She saw the vast potential beyond the confines of the syndicated TV show, the global audience waiting to embrace her unique blend of country heart and pop sensibility. Staying meant remaining Porter's girl singer, forever defined by their partnership. Leaving meant risking everything, but it was the only path to becoming the artist she knew she was meant to be. She tried repeatedly to talk to Porter, to explain her feelings, her need for independence. She tried to explain her feelings. I tried to talk to him. I'd say, Porter, I need to go out on my own. I need to try my wings. But he just wouldn't hear it. He thought I was being ungrateful. He thought I owed him. And I did owe him. But I didn't owe him my whole life, my whole career. The conversations were, by all accounts, heartbreaking and unproductive. Porter, deeply hurt and perhaps genuinely unable to comprehend her perspective, reacted with anger, accusations, and emotional manipulation. He reportedly threatened her, reminded her of all he had done for her, painted her departure as a catastrophic mistake that would ruin her career. He simply could not or would not let her go. Their love-hate relationship, as Dolly described it, was now tilted heavily towards hate, or at least towards bitter, irreconcilable conflict. The atmosphere on the set became toxic. The tension was palpable, affecting the entire cast and crew. Dolly recalled driving to the studio physically ill, dreading the confrontations, the strained silences, the forced smiles for the camera. The joy had gone out of the music, replaced by a suffocating sense of obligation. She knew she couldn't continue like this. She had reached her breaking point, trapped in an impossible situation, unable to break through Porter's resistance with words. Dolly Parton turned to the language she knew best, music. Sometime in late 1973 or early 1974, amidst the emotional turmoil, she sat down and poured her heart, her gratitude, her pain, and her unwavering resolve into a song. It wasn't a song of anger, though anger was surely present. It wasn't a song of blame, though blame could have easily been assigned. Instead, she crafted something far more profound, a song that transcended the bitterness of their conflict. It was a song that acknowledged the deep, enduring love she felt for Porter, the bittersweet memories she would cherish. But it was also an unequivocal statement of finality, a gentle but firm assertion of her need to leave. We both know I'm not what you need. It was a masterpiece of emotional complexity, capturing the specific heartbreaking nuance of loving someone enough to walk away. The song was I Will Always Love You. Armed with this musical peace offering, she approached Porter one last time. The story, recounted countless times by Dolly and confirmed in essence by Porter before his death, has become the defining legend of their breakup. She didn't schedule a meeting with lawyers. She didn't issue an ultimatum. She walked into Porter's office on Music Row, guitar in hand. Dolly recalled the moment. I said, "Porter, sit down. I've written something I think you need to hear." He was just sitting there at his desk, probably mad at me as usual. And I just started singing I Will Always Love You. As the simple, devastating lyrics filled the small office, Porter Wagoner began to weep. The song cut through his anger, his pride, his sense of betrayal, reaching the core of the affection he still felt for her, and perhaps acknowledging the truth he had been unwilling to face. He heard the love, but he also heard the finality. She continued. He was crying, and he said, "Juan, that's the prettiest song I ever heard. Okay, you can go, but only if I get to produce that record." It was the breakthrough. The song had accomplished what arguments and pleas could not. It allowed Porter to let go, not with anger, but with a measure of grace and understanding, framed within the context of the music that had always bound them. His condition, that he produce the record, was perhaps his final act of control, his way of putting his stamp on her departure, ensuring he was still part of her story even as she left his orbit. Dolly readily agreed. The stalemate was broken, the path was cleared. In the spring of 1974, Dolly Parton taped her final episodes of The Porter Wagoner Show. Her departure was officially announced in June. Almost immediately, RCA released I Will Always Love You as Dolly's next solo single. Produced by Bob Ferguson, the record soared straight to number 1 on the Billboard country charts in June 1974. It was her third solo chart topper, a poignant and commercially powerful statement marking her independence. It served as the perfect bittersweet soundtrack to the end of an era. The butterfly had finally broken free from the gilded cage. The Appalachian queen had gracefully but decisively abdicated her role beside the rhinestone king. She was poised to conquer new worlds. But the king, left alone in his emptying kingdom, was nursing wounds far deeper than anyone realized. That emotional farewell, achieved through a beautiful song, would unfortunately not last. The song had offered a moment of transcendent grace, a seemingly perfect emotional closure, sealed in tears and mutual respect. But the complex web of contracts, publishing rights, and deeply wounded egos could not be untangled by a single ballad. As the butterfly soared towards global superstardom, the king left behind felt not just sadness, but a growing sense of betrayal and financial injustice. The tearful farewell would prove tragically fragile, merely the calm before the storm of a brutal legal war that would shatter the remaining fragments of their bond. Dolly Parton's departure from the Porter Wagoner Show was the end of an era, but for Porter, it felt like the end of everything. His show, which had been built around their electric dynamic, suffered an immediate and irreversible decline in ratings. His own solo career, which had always taken a back seat to their duets and the demands of television, failed to regain momentum. He felt adrift, abandoned, and overshadowed by the meteoric rise of the star he had created. The sense of betrayal, fueled by his wounded pride and the financial instability he had feared his entire life, festered. It curdled into a deep and bitter resentment. He watched as Dolly, now free, began her conquest of the mainstream. Dolly, meanwhile, was soaring. The years immediately following her split from Porter were a period of almost unbelievable success. Hits like Love is Like a Butterfly, The Bargain Store, and the massive crossover Smash Here You Come Again cemented her status as a global superstar. She launched her own television show, starred in hit movies like 9 to 5, and built a formidable business empire. She was becoming not just a country singer, but a cultural icon, a household name synonymous with star. Porter watched this ascent from the sidelines, his bitterness growing. He felt he had not been properly compensated for his role in launching her career. He still held management contracts and, most importantly, publishing rights through Opry for the hundreds of songs she wrote during her 7 years on his show, a catalog that was now one of the most valuable in the world. In 1979, 5 years after Dolly had left, Porter Wagoner did the unthinkable. He filed a $3 million lawsuit against Dolly Parton, alleging breach of contract and demanding a share of her future earnings. The lawsuit was a shocking and ugly public spectacle. It was a brutal betrayal of their personal history, dragging their father-daughter relationship into the cold, unforgiving language of a legal complaint. It pitted the mentor against his former protégée, turning their personal history into a public fight. It laid bare the complex financial entanglements and the deep emotional wounds that lay beneath the surface of their seemingly amicable split. For Dolly, the lawsuit was a devastating blow. It was a betrayal from the man she still, despite everything, considered family. But she was no longer the naive girl from the mountains. She was a savvy, determined businesswoman. She countersued, escalating the legal battle. For Porter, it was a desperate act, likely fueled by financial difficulties, jealousy, and a wounded ego. The man who had been the king was now, in the public's eye, a bitter, greedy old man, trying to claim a piece of his former pupil's success. The press was merciless. Ultimately, the case was settled out of court in 1980. The terms were not made public, but Dolly later confirmed she agreed to pay Porter a substantial sum, reportedly around $1 million. It was not, she insisted, an admission of legal wrongdoing. It was, as she described it, a business decision. It was the price she had to pay to buy her freedom, to finally sever the last tie, and to preserve what was left of the good memories. I paid my dues, she said, and I paid them dearly. The lawsuit damaged their relationship for years. It was the final devastating act of their professional divorce, leaving a cold, acrimonious silence. Porter retreated further into the world of the Grand Ole Opry, his health beginning to decline, his drinking reportedly increasing. His show was finally canceled in 1981. Dolly continued her ascent, becoming one of the most successful and beloved entertainers in the world, but the ghost of her painful split with Porter always lingered. The legal war was over, leaving two estranged empires and a cold, absolute silence. Legally, they were free. Emotionally, they were imprisoned by resentment. But even the deepest wounds, if given enough time, can begin to scar over. That bitter silence would not last forever. It would eventually be broken, not by lawyers, but by the undeniable pull of the shared history they had created together and the slow, persistent work of forgiveness. The $1 million settlement in 1980 drew a sharp legal line under the Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton partnership. The business was concluded, the contracts dissolved, the financial ties severed, but the emotional fallout lingered, casting a long, cold shadow over both their lives. The beautiful harmony that had once captivated a nation was replaced by a silence born of bitterness, betrayal, and profound hurt. As Dolly Parton ascended to become one of the most famous women in the world, conquering Hollywood, pop charts, and building a vast business empire, Porter Wagoner seemed to shrink, retreating into the familiar embrace of the grand ole Opry, a king reigning over a diminished, increasingly nostalgic kingdom. For Porter Wagoner, the years immediately following the lawsuit were undoubtedly difficult. His national relevance had faded significantly with the cancellation of his long-running television show in 1981. His recording career, despite continued efforts, yielded few hits. He battled health problems, including serious heart issues that forced temporary retirements. According to various biographical accounts and interviews with contemporaries, he struggled with periods of depression and reportedly leaned heavily on alcohol to cope with the perceived injustices and the fading spotlight. The man whose entire life had been a flight from insecurity found himself once again facing uncertainty, overshadowed by the very star he felt he had created. But Porter Wagoner was above all else a survivor. He possessed the same stubborn resilience that had carried him out of the Ozark coal mines decades earlier. He found solace and purpose in his enduring role at the Grand Ole Opry. The Opry wasn't just a stage for him, it was his family, his community, his identity. Week after week, year after year, he donned his glittering nudie suits and stepped into the Opry circle, performing his classic hits, telling his familiar stories, connecting with the loyal audience that still revered him as a cornerstone of traditional country music. He celebrated milestone anniversaries, 30 years, 40 years, eventually over 50 years as an Opry member, becoming a beloved elder statesman, a living link to the genre's golden age. He mentored countless young artists who joined the Opry, offering advice and encouragement, perhaps seeing in them echoes of the raw talent he had once recognized in Dolly. He remained a proud guardian of the Opry's traditions, even as the sound of country music evolved dramatically around him. Dolly Parton, meanwhile, was operating in a different universe. The 1980s cemented her status as a global icon. Movies like The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas and Rhinestone, combined with massive pop hits like her duet with Kenny Rogers, Islands in the Stream, made her one of the most recognizable and bankable stars on the planet. In 1986, she realized a lifelong dream by opening her own theme park, Dollywood, in her native East Tennessee, a testament to her business acumen and her enduring connection to her Appalachian roots. Yet even amidst this whirlwind of international fame and fortune, the ghost of her fractured relationship with Porter Wagoner lingered. In interviews, while always professional, she often spoke wistfully of their time together, acknowledging the profound impact he had on her career, tempering the narrative of conflict with expressions of underlying affection and gratitude. The lawsuit was a painful memory, but the 7 years of shared history, the musical magic they had created, could not be entirely erased. The silence between them, however, remained largely unbroken for several years after the settlement. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too raw, but over time, their anger and resentment slowly began to fade. Quietly, behind the scenes, mutual friends may have acted as intermediaries. Perhaps shared appearances at industry events led to brief, polite encounters. The first significant public sign of a thaw, a tentative olive branch extended across the divide, came in June of 1988. A full 7 years after the lawsuit was settled, Dolly, at the height of her pop culture fame, made a shocking and unannounced decision. She would return to the Porter Wagoner show for a special reunion episode, filmed fittingly at her newly opened theme park, Dollywood. It was an emotional and cathartic moment, a public bearing of the hatchet. The old magic, that telepathic vocal blend, was still there, now deepened by the passage of time and the pain they had both endured. It was a signal to the world and to each other that the war was over, the healing had begun. The 1988 reunion was not a magic wand that instantly repaired their relationship. The hurt ran too deep for that, but it opened a door. Over the next 2 decades, Porter and Dolly began a slow, cautious journey back towards each other, not as mentor and protégée, not as business partners, but tentatively, carefully, navigating the path towards a different kind of connection, friendship. They would occasionally share the stage at Opry events or mutual friends' benefits. Each appearance seemed to chip away a little more at the wall of silence and resentment. Dolly, secure in her own immense success, could now look back at their shared past with greater perspective, acknowledging Porter's crucial role without feeling threatened or diminished. She consistently credited him in interviews, always referring to him with respect, acknowledging the invaluable lessons he had taught her, even amidst the difficulties. Porter, too, seemed to undergo a transformation. As the immediate sting of Dolly's departure and the bitterness of the lawsuit faded into the past, his anger seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, immense pride in the global phenomenon his former girl singer had become. He finally seemed able to accept and celebrate her success, not as a threat or a betrayal, but as his own greatest legacy. He began speaking of her fondly in his own interviews, acknowledging her unique talent and acknowledging perhaps his own mistakes in handling their parting. He was and always would be the man who discovered Dolly Parton, and he began to embrace that part of his legacy with a newfound grace. The true turning point, the moment that signaled a full and public reconciliation, came in May of 2002. Porter Wagoner, after decades as a cornerstone of the genre, was finally being inducted into the prestigious Country Music Hall of Fame. It was the culmination of his life's work, a recognition long overdue. The Hall of Fame asked Dolly Parton if she would do the honors of inducting her former mentor. Standing before the assembled elite of the country music world, Dolly delivered a speech that was both deeply personal and profoundly moving. She didn't shy away from acknowledging their tumultuous history, referencing their love-hate relationship and the fights they had. But the overwhelming tone was one of love, respect, and enduring gratitude. In her speech, she said, "Nobody knows how Porter and I feel about each other. We were like husband and wife and brother and sister. Porter, I want to thank you for seeing something in me that maybe nobody else did. You opened that golden door for me, and I walked through it, and I will be eternally grateful to you for that, and I will always love you." It was a full-circle moment, breathtaking in its emotional honesty. The song she had written to signify their painful breakup, now repurposed nearly 3 decades later as a declaration of lasting, complex affection and respect on the biggest night of his professional life. The applause in the hall was thunderous, sustained, acknowledging not just Porter's induction, but the profound significance of Dolly standing beside him. The reconciliation, begun years earlier with tentative steps, was now complete, sealed in the public eye. The mentor and the protégée, the king and the queen, had found their way back to a place of mutual honor and acknowledged history. In the years that followed his Hall of Fame induction, Porter Wagoner settled comfortably into the revered role of a living legend. Though his health became increasingly fragile, marked by ongoing heart issues, including bypass surgery and later emphysema, he remained devoted to the Grand Ole Opry. The stage was his lifeblood. He continued to perform almost every weekend, instantly recognizable in his ever more elaborate rhinestone suits, his presence a beloved link to the genre's golden age. He released occasional albums, often focusing on gospel music, a return to the spiritual roots of his childhood. He seemed largely at peace, content with his place in the firmament, even if it was no longer at the very center. He had survived the storms, weathered the changes, and endured. But time inevitably began to claim its due. In the spring of 2007, Porter Wagoner was diagnosed with lung cancer. The diagnosis was grim, the prognosis poor. He faced the news with the same quiet, almost stubborn stoicism that had characterized his entire life, a resilience forged in the hard-scrabble Ozarks. He continued to perform at the Opry as long as his strength allowed, unwilling to surrender the stage that had been his home for 50 years. His final Opry performance came just weeks before his death. As his condition worsened rapidly in the fall of 2007, the Nashville music community rallied around him, a testament to the deep respect and affection he commanded despite his sometimes prickly personality. And at the forefront of those offering comfort and support during his final weeks was Dolly Parton. The complex history, the bitter fights, the devastating lawsuit, all seemed to melt away in the face of mortality. Dolly became a regular visitor at Porter's bedside during his final weeks in a Nashville hospice. Their conversations, according to those close to the situation, were filled with reminiscences, forgiveness, and expressions of mutual love and respect. The decades of conflict dissolved, leaving only the bedrock of their shared history, the undeniable bond forged under the television lights so many years before. In one particularly poignant, now legendary moment, recounted by Dolly herself just days before Porter's death, she sat beside his bed. He was weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. Knowing that music had always been their deepest connection, she took his frail hand, leaned close, and softly sang for him, one last time, the song that had defined both their painful parting and their enduring, complicated love, "I Will Always Love You." It was a final private performance, a moment of closure, grace, and ultimate forgiveness between two souls whose lives had been so deeply, inextricably, and often painfully intertwined. On October 28, 2007, Porter Wayne Wagoner passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. He was 80 years old. His funeral, held appropriately at the Grand Ole Opry House, was a testament to the giant he had been. The biggest stars in country music came to pay their respects. Dolly Parton delivered a tearful, heartfelt eulogy, remembering him not just as the demanding mentor or the formidable boss, but as a complex, brilliant, deeply human father figure who had seen something special in a scared girl from the mountains and changed her life forever. And then, standing beside his rhinestone-draped casket in the house he had loved more than any other place on earth, Dolly sang her final farewell. Accompanied only by a simple acoustic guitar, her voice thick with emotion but clear and true, she sang, "I Will Always Love You." The song born from their breakup now served as the ultimate heartbreaking tribute to their reconciliation. The rhinestone cowboy had finally ridden off into the sunset. The star he had once tried to control sang him a final farewell. Their final perfect harmony was achieved, not in music, but in forgiveness. The legacy of Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton is one of America's most complex and profound musical narratives, a human drama of ambition, gratitude, control, and the quest for artistic freedom. For 7 extraordinary years, they were pioneers, bringing traditional country music to national television on The Porter Wagoner Show, with Dolly as its glittering centerpiece. They redefined the duet, creating a magical synergy between his earthy baritone and her ethereal soprano that influenced generations. Their paths diverged dramatically, yet remained forever intertwined. Porter, a giant of the Grand Ole Opry, was the man who opened the golden door for Dolly, but whose own insecurities and need for control ultimately fractured their great partnership. Dolly Parton transcended country music to become a global icon, a brilliant songwriter, businesswoman, and philanthropist. Their story is a powerful lesson in the clash between gratitude and ambition, loyalty and personal growth, culminating in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that stands as a monument to the pain of hopelessly entangled business and personal relationships. However, their hard-won final reconciliation, marked by quiet moments of grace at Porter's bedside, offers a profound message of forgiveness. They were two forces of nature who could not coexist, yet whose stories are incomplete without the other. Ironically, "I Will Always Love You," the song born from the specific pain of their professional divorce, became one of the best-selling singles of all time, a global anthem of love and loss. It is the ultimate proof that the most transcendent art can arise from the deepest conflicts, a partnership forged in ambition, illuminated by genius, and ultimately redeemed by grace.